Hi, this is Tutor Nick P, and this is lesson 84. Today we're going to look at the difference between mutter, grumble, mumble, and murmur. Yeah, over the years I've often had students ask the difference. All of them mean to speak in kind of a low voice, that's an unclear voice. But again, let's try to look at the slight differences between them and see how they'll be used. In which situations you're more likely to use one of these than the other. Probably the first two. Mutter and grumble are probably the most common. Both of these two tend to be used with you're angry and you're speaking under your breath. So, yeah, mumble and murmur doesn't have to have anything to do with being angry or annoyed. So that's the first difference we should look at. All right, so let's look at the definition for mutter first. To talk in a low voice or under one's breath. Yeah, something like that that's under your breath, in a way that is hard to understand, especially because one is annoyed or upset or talking to oneself, maybe like a crazy person, or it could even happen to anybody if they were just really annoyed and it stayed on their mind, they might be talking to themselves. All right, let's look at the first example here. I'm going to read it normal first, She said, "I cannot believe the position she put me in," Jane muttered to herself. But if it's muttering, it's probably, "I can't believe the position she put me in." That would probably be more like the muttering part. So you can't understand it clearly. So again, I'll read it one more time. "I cannot believe the position she put me in," Jane muttered to herself. And how could she do that? Something like that. All right. The second one. "That's a lie," Jeff muttered. Or maybe if he was a lie, something like that. So especially when you're annoyed, especially when you're upset, you don't want to speak out loud, so you're kind of holding it in, kind of under your breath. That's what we mean by to mutter. All right, grumble. I almost think of grumble a little more angry. All right, let's look at the definition first. If a person grumbles, they complain, showing they are in a bad mood, often in a low voice. It's very clear they're not happy about it. Grumble tends to be used often about things that tend to happen more often or on a regular basis. Yeah, mutter doesn't necessarily. It could be about a particular incident or a particular thing that happens. It's just that day, you're angry or annoyed about something. So let's look at grumbling. Ralph was grumbling about how stupid his boss was. Okay, that's the sentence of saying it. But what is he doing? He's probably, boss, you don't know what he's doing. If he says that to me one more time, sometimes it's in a low voice. Sometimes it's even a little louder. You might actually be a little clearer than mutter sometimes, but it's more continuous. It might go on a little bit longer. Let's look at the second example. She was grumbling about her husband never listens to her. So he doesn't listen to me. What's wrong with him? I'm tell him not to do that. He don't listen. I can't believe it. I swear, one day I'm gonna something like that. She was grumbling about how her husband never listens to her. All right, number three. Jim grumbled about how his neighbor's dog often poops on his lawn. Yeah, that damn dog. He poops on my lawn one more time. Dog. Something like that. Probably grumbling. Again, grumbling sounds a little more continuous. Sounds a little bit more often, especially about things that happen, like I said, on a regular basis. Mutter tends, like I said, could be more like a particular incident. But both of them are annoyed. I don't know. I almost think of grumble is a little more angry, but really, it's they both could be annoyed. They both could be angry, and they're both a little unclear. But again, yeah, grumble tends to go on a little longer, and it tends to be a little more continuous, and it tends to be about things that happen more often. All right, let's look at mumble. Now, out of all these four, mumble is probably the words that are spoken are the hardest to understand. Sometimes somebody's mixing their words, or they're not opening their mouth enough. They're not pronouncing the words very clearly. So it's probably the most difficult to understand in that sense. So let's look at mumble. To speak in a very low voice and very unclear, often because one is not opening one's mouth much, so that it is difficult to understand. People often mumble out of nervousness. It could be because they're nervous, embarrassment, or it could be a speech problem. It could be somebody who's like an old person who's senile, and and they're and then I'm gonna go over there. What was it? It's something like that. Mumbling. Yeah, it's kind of like that. Or let's look at the examples that will help clarify it more. All right, so the first one. He keeps mumbling. I cannot figure out what he is talking about. Yeah, I remember that they used to have that old Dick Tracy cartoon. I know they made a movie out of it. They actually had a character called Mumbles, where that's where they had to ask him a lot of questions, and you hear him going, what is he saying? Who knows? Or Barbara was mumbling in her sleep. Yeah, maybe you understand some words in between. I'm gonna get no, don't do that. Oh no. Like I said, this one is probably the hardest to understand with the way somebody's pronouncing the words. Or Amy mumbled that she was sorry. All right, this is more out of nervousness or embarrassment. Maybe she. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, I'm doing it again. Something like that. Maybe a child that's a little nervous. With the parent correcting them, or somebody where they're nervous or they're embarrassed. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't feel something like that. So again, mumble is the least clear the way the word's pronounced. Murmur. Out of these four, murmur is probably the lowest in sound volume. It's almost silent, or it's somewhere in between silence and like a whisper. Even a whisper sometimes is louder than murmur. With a whisper, we hear a lot of S sounds, like, can you do that? I'm told you to go over there, do that. Sure. You have a lot of sort of sounds in whispers. Murmur. So let's take a look at murmur. Speak in a very quiet voice, especially so that not many people can hear you. Yeah, purposely you're probably speaking low. All right, let's look at the first example. That monk was murmuring his prayers as he was holding his prayer beads. Yeah, maybe he's in the park, maybe he's on a bus or on the train, and he doesn't want to speak too loudly. He doesn't want to, disturb other people, but he still wants to say his prayers. So he might be holding it, and you see his lips moving, something like that. Or if it were, maybe I could do it better if it is, like a Christian one. At least I know, they must. So it's really, really low. So the voice is really, really low, so that you cannot really hear what they're saying. So we might do it with prayers. When somebody's trying to pray, especially if they don't mind praying in public, but they still don't want to disturb other people, we might describe that as murmuring. Or let's look at the second example. She murmured, "Let's go in the other room and talk." Now, of course, in this case, she didn't speak as loud as I just said that. Kind of like that. It's the lowest of all in volume. Okay, so just very quickly review. Both mutter and mumble are actually probably a little bit more similar because there's usually about annoyance or anger. Like I say, grumble tends to be about stuff that happens more often. I think it's a little more angry, and I think of mutter is a little bit more annoyed, but they're similar. They're both speaking under their breath. Mumble is the least clear as far as pronunciation is concerned. So it's kind of the hardest. Maybe people are jumbling or mixing their words, and really makes it hard to understand for that reason. Murmur, like I said, is the lowest as far as volume is concerned. So it's hard to hear that way. But you might be able to read lips, like in this one, when somebody said, you might still be able to read their lips if you see them directly in front of you. So you might be able to understand that. Or like I say with the prayers. All right, well, anyway, I hope that clarifies it. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.